jobs. We're growing at an employment growth is around 5 percent. What we found was that when it comes to building permits, we've actually 2018, 2019. This first quarter, we've actually seen a spike of 70%. So I say this only to illustrate that that COVID-19 response cannot be a one-size-fits-all. City, and we see it in our own country, and we see it globally. There isn't a single magic bullet that's going to cure the impact of COVID-19, but you have to get back to some very basic fundamentals: productivity, making sure that people have the services they require, and that requires also, of course, investment. For my ask, of course, as you pointed out, put something on the table. It's an ask that should not surprise people, and that is that, you know, Canadian municipalities require funding from the senior levels of government in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 billion. And I don't mean this as an ask sort of cap and hiss, as true partners in the recovery. I cannot see without the cities being involved. That is where most of the population live, right across the world. Without cities, it's very difficult to bring about economic recovery. And so areas like environmental sustainability, housing, transit, dealing with income disparities is very, very important to move forward. So I leave you with a message that the lesson of COVID-19 is also that, you know, as a society, as a global society, we cannot or deaf to things that we heard in the past. Global pandemic is not a new term. The effects of a global pandemic is nothing new. Many statements, research has been done on that. We have to, and we should not fall into a false sense of security and think that our generation was somehow passed by something like COVID-19. That is a valuable lesson for all of us. That means that we have to be ready, we have to use our resources, and we have to be resilient. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very important message from a person who really has been tackling this pandemic firsthand and saying that resilience is important and preparedness, alertness. We cannot be complacent in face of crisis. Very good. Now we have Her Lordship Bonnie Crombie, who is the mayor of Mississauga, and she was also, she is no strategic. She was a member of the Canadian, the White House. She was a member of the Canadian, the White House of Commons, and before that, entrepreneur and a consultant. Your Lordship, Bonnie Crombie.
Very kind introduction, and yes, I'd like to share how Mississauga is this time of crisis, and I'm glad to see that there are federal, and I was hoping provincial members on, we could each relay the financial hardship that it has imposed on us differently. To put things in context, Mississauga is an edge city, the 6th largest in Canada, the 3rd largest in Ontario, Toronto, Ottawa, and Mississauga. We have 98,000 businesses, 75 Fortune 500 companies, and 14 multinationals. We are a vibrant, diverse, very inclusive, welcoming city. And I think we may have been the first to offer the call to prayer as a solution to the isolation and depression that many Islamic community, the Muslim community were feeling during Ramadan. And so that was that many other cities embraced, and we were very, very pleased to see the way. Like all of you, our city hall has been closed since the pandemic, since the emergency orders. Yet we're still operating at full capacity. Learned, just as businesses has had to learn that we have to be nimble, adaptive, and we have to reinvent ourselves in the way that we offer programs and services, and do so offering online recreational programs to our residents, such as yoga classes, Tai Chi, etc. So those are some of the I've learned. We're also promoting ourselves as Made in Mississauga Made Solutions to Business, working our residents to shop local. We're one of the first to have joined Shop Here, which is the digital Main Street program by Google, a shop online service, and we're very behind that and have joined. It is powered by Google, supported by Shopify, and it comes at a critical time to allow businesses to online services at no cost. And once again, we have created a virtual called Mississauga Made in a campaign to give our local businesses, who are really our neighbors, our friends, and our family, and we need to support and get behind, give them a platform and give them, we have witnessed many of them changing the way they do business, whether it is curb front or delivery services. It is, they have really innovative and readapt the way they're offering their products and services. My advice to the federal and to our cities, if I can put it into context for you, this is a financial realities. I urge you to be urgent in your thoughts and direct. We very much welcome the announcement that was made just now of $14 billion of funding from the federal government. I think that meant $5.5 billion for Ontario, largely to community health care, testing, tracing, LTCs, etc. We are announcement learning to see what will be available for cities for our operations, because as you know, we're facing an operating deficit, and I'm going to talk about that in 1 second. While we appreciated the early gas tax funding that was made available last Monday, I have to say that that really only gave us a little bit of liquidity on the capital side, but it was money that we had already planned for, already accounted for, and did not address our operations crisis at all. So it wasn't very helpful. In Mississauga's terms, we are at the end of June to be in a $60 million. That's probably middle of the range. I know Toronto burns 65 million per week, and largely that is their transit. Our transit is in a month, so not insignificant either. As you all know, we're not collecting revenues. We have deferred all our revenues, as has everyone, and we have deferred about almost $400 million in property taxes. So we, like everyone, will have liquidity issues. We had the foresight to extend our liquidity from $100 million to 250. So we are on sound footing. We're a fiscally run city. We have solid reserves, but at the same time, we're paying services, including police, fire, paramedic, transit workers, long-term care, PSWs, sanitation workers, waste and sanitation. So we have a large payroll to meet, and yet we have deferred virtually all the revenue that we earn. Our transit revenue represents about 44% of the total, and another 39% is from recreational programs and services that, since our facilities are closed, we're not able to offer those programs, even though we are, as I mentioned, offering some of them online. We don't have the ability, as other of government do, to run deficits. I think we're all acutely aware of that. And with respect to our transit, as I said, we're losing $7.5 million. When it does come back, we've offered plexiglass shields for our drivers to give them better protection. We will be asking that people wear masks on board, but it will cost us half as many people with the physical distancing guidelines in place. So as you know, if you kindly just wrap up. Sorry?
Yes.
Are we wrapping up?
Wrap up? Yes.
Yes. The last thing I think I'll share with you is that municipalities are the only level have laid off of their employees. And in Mississauga's case, it has been over 2,000 workers, and also implemented a hiring freeze. So we're very much concerned about cities' liquidity issues. So we're asking the federal and the provincial government to do what they can to make it direct and to make it. Thank you very much for allowing me to share our financial position.
Christian, you're muted.
Sorry. So I just wanted to thank you once again, Mayor, for in these times of hopelessness. It's quite important as well. And we have Pasternak. The next one would be James Pasternak, who is ward number 6, I think. Keyword, Mr. Pasternak. Are you there, James? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Please.
So thank you very much for, if you could restart my time. That's a common statement we make in council meetings. A gracious invitation. I thank you very much to the UN Habitat and Urban Economy Forum. And I want to thank all the participants, Minister Marneau, civic leaders, academics, members of the media, and other elected officials. I chair the Infrastructure and Environment Committee of the City of Toronto, committee that reviews and appropriates much of the capital expenditures and infrastructure building in the City of Toronto. And I just want to say off the top that I've seen the three levels of government work collegially and very well of our federal system on how the three levels of government work: municipal, provincial, and federal. And I think that's why Canada is going to pull out of this very well. Like many municipalities and urban centers, Toronto had a rude and shocking awakening back in the middle of March. We are a city that historically has topped for livability, for wellness, for prosperity, for safety. Toronto remains the economic engine of Canada. And of course, people from all settle here. Our family of hospitals and social capital supports, shelters, the heroics of our frontline workers, and our universal daycare, combined with a resilient economy, made us manage the crisis the way possible. While deaths were tragic and the illnesses were frightening, the numbers remain manageable and our system overwhelmed. Over the last 20 municipal mergers, Toronto has taken on much more than it can manage. Taken on one of the largest social housing portfolios in North America. We're responsible for 2 highways, which are really provincial. We carry the burden of daycare, transit operating shortfalls, intake for refugee claimants and asylum seekers. We transfer funds of tens of millions of dollars to school boards. Like most municipalities, as mentioned today, we must, by statute, pass a balanced budget. And I'm sure you heard many times from Mayor Tory. Right now, we're burning through about $65 million a week. The best case scenario is that we'll come out of this with a $1 billion deficit. The worst case scenario is probably about 2.25 or 2. Over the past decade, Canadians have woken up to the realization that it is their ministers that have the greatest impact on daily lives. Canadians realized that during this pandemic, their local government was a source of advice, safety, and healing. And overnight, people could see what they once had and what they lost. We provide the investments we make and the policies we introduce shape neighborhoods, affects one's businesses, the raising of one's family, the prosperity one will realize, the safety one feels, and the character of children we raise. And of course, if Canada is to be a country of strength and livability, it will be our urban center and the civic center, culture and political leadership that we have that will determine the future. There is a lot of talk these days about money for airlines in the tens of billions. And while airlines are a vital part of our economy and they employ a lot of people and they close the frontiers that we have in Canada, people don't live in airplanes. In fact, 80% of Canadians live in cities, as we've heard a couple of times. Mayor John Tory and I discussed the other day that monies from other levels of government to help us through this can't be seen, but really as an investment. Toronto's GDP outpaces the national average. Employment growth in Toronto between 2018 and 2017 is twice the national. Toronto is about 8% of the country's population, but is home to about 18%.
Yes. Thank you.
Krishnan, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. James Pasternak. Sorry that we are running out of time, and really unfortunate that we are unable to provide more time for extensive discussions, this dialogue further. I hope we'll be able to count on you to come to continue this process of discussion and dialogue as well. Thank you very much. Now, next we have his Lordship Mayor Barry Frabnovic. He's the Mayor of City of Kitchener and member of City Mayors Caucus, Federation of Canadian Municipalities. FCM has been recently made a lot of initiatives and efforts in bringing together the possibility of funding to municipalities with the what shall I say, provinces and the federal government. Your voice, very Frabnovic.
Thank you very much, Nantha, to you, Reza, and the entire team for organizing this and the opportunity to discuss the current COVID-19 challenges and opportunities going forward that cities like Kitchener and regions like Waterloo, Canada's 10th largest CMA, and the western end of the Toronto-Waterloo Region Innovation Corridor. The COVID-19 health crisis is top of mind for governments. We knew that having an effective response to the health crisis with actions like shutting down and working from home would have an equally negative impact to the economy. But it was the right thing to do to flatten the curve, ensure our healthcare system wasn't over, and save lives. As municipalities, we closed our facilities like arenas and community centers for health and safety reasons. But the financial consequence was that our user fee revenue all but went to zero. Ridership decreased by over 90%. We also provided a municipal economic support plan, which provides various measures of financial relief to all property owners. This combination of lost revenues and trying to maintain essential services, while the right thing to do, means municipalities are bleeding money and are calling for emergency operating funding from both the federal and provincial governments. Today, let me be clear, Canadian municipalities are in financial crisis. Kitchener is losing at least $2 million per month. The Waterloo region are losing $10 million per month. This week, the Prime Minister recognized this as a national crisis and accelerated this year's gas tax fund payments, and we're thankful for this. But this money isn't new money and only helps us short-term with cash flow. Kitchener joins FCM and my big city colleagues in calling for at least $10 billion for municipalities to tackle the immediate financial crisis nationwide. We need all governments to step up now. Jurisdictional wrangling must not stand in the way of public safety or Canada's economic recovery. Conversation with First Ministers. Just moments ago, in fact, Prime Minister Trudeau announced $14 billion in funding, subject to agreements being negotiated. This is great news, but we need municipalities to be a major part of this. Funding needs to go to all municipalities fast and nationwide, and it must be straightforward, direct, and flexible. This means a single transfer that municipalities can use as needed, whether to help with transit or recreational losses, or help with new costs around supportive COVID-19 protections. Looking ahead to the economic recovery, we know that bringing the Canadian economy back to life will require everybody working together, and that can't happen without support for municipalities. Locally, we created the Business and Economic Support Team, Waterloo, leaders from our business community and other local stakeholders like municipalities. This was done to listen to business concerns and plan our local economic recovery collaboratively. Investing in infrastructure is a proven stimulus strategy, and those infrastructure projects, by and large, go through municipalities since we own 60% of Canada's infrastructure assets. But without emergency funding from federal and provincial governments, municipalities will have to scale back existing infrastructure projects. That undermines any stimulus plan before it starts. As we go through the economic recovery, talk about the new normal, and discuss doing things better, and in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we see the opportunities for future improvements. Let's not lose the lessons of this pandemic. Let's do things now so that all orders of government can work together to better able serve our citizens and be ready to weather any future downturns. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Muted.
Sorry, as you rightly say, Your Lordship, the fund municipalities and communities, that's the only way we can have sustainable recovery. So now, now we have Marco Camia. He's a senior economist at UN Habitat, and he is leading the global operational normative work on urban economy and municipal finance. He has written several books and also has been instrumental in the formation of the Urban Economy Forum. Here you are, Marco Camia.
Marco has sent us a video, and I will.
Okay, please.
It is a pleasure to provide a few words from UN Habitat. My name is Marco Camilla, based in Nairobi, Kenya. Thanks to the Finance of Canada and to all participants in this important roundtable. UN Habitat is working on the urban economy and deeply engaged with local governments to fight the current pandemic and its effects. We are closely coordinating with the Urban Economy Forum, creating a pavilion and planning a report on the future of cities. In particular, with the COVID-19, cities will need health systems, but also will have to build more productive economies to support the cost of building with basic health support and basic services to the population. So looking forward to continuing working together. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the video. Now we have Laura Dudas, who is the Deputy Mayor of Ottawa. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Bonjour tout le monde. On behalf of Mayor Jim Watson and my colleagues on Ottawa City Council, I want to thank the Urban Economy Forum and UN Habitat for inviting me to participate in today's discussion. The COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for our cities, which have had to react quickly in order to protect our economies and the health and safety of our residents, particularly our most vulnerable populations. The City of Ottawa itself is losing approximately $1 million a day. It's facing net losses of $66 million as of this month, $123 million by September, and $186 million come December. These are significant and unforeseen losses that will have impact on the city's ability to deliver services to our residents. In response to the pandemic, our city has implemented programs and initiatives to help our residents and our businesses get through this challenging time. We've been turning arenas into shelters for our city's homeless populations, acquire hotel spaces for longer term housing alternatives. We're deferring and operating emergency childcare centers for our frontline workers. But at the same time, we're keeping our essential cities services running, even after making to temporarily lay off more than 4,000 city employees from a workforce of roughly 7. The cost of this increased programming and maintaining regular operations is coupled with the loss of the city's revenue generating streams, such as transit fares, taxes. And as we've just heard, this is not a City of Ottawa program. This is a substantial challenge facing cities right across our country. To extend my thanks to Prime Minister Trudeau and Minister Morneau for announcing that the federal government will accept tax funding for 2020. But as it's been said before, this $2 billion was already budgeted for, and that we are asking for more to be done. The City of Ottawa is echoing the call from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, asking the federal government to provide flexible emergency operating funding. For cities, this money is important for us to keep essential municipal services going strong as we look to recovering from this pandemic. As a member of the City of Ottawa's Economic Partners Task Force, I've been seeing firsthand how our local businesses are the hardest by this pandemic and are struggling to survive. Our city has introduced initiatives and support to these local businesses, but there's still those that are slipping through the cracks. These small and medium-sized businesses are truly the backbone of our economy, and they need our help. At the same time, our local economy is bracing for the anticipated loss of tourism in the coming months, which is a national capital region. So I'll just summarize to say that cities cannot do this alone. And in order to deliver the services and our residents need throughout this, we will need to continue to work in collaboration with our federal and our provincial partners. It's going to take all of us to get through the COVID recovery stage. And I want to thank our federal and provincial partners for their continued support.
Thank you, Madam. You rightly say cities cannot do this alone. The partnership as well as collective action with available funding is key to any recovery that is sustainable. Now we have Jeffrey Russell from Accenture. One of the mottos of one of the leading companies, Accenture, is data, actions, and outcomes. The need at this time and hour. Here you are, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Anantha and Julie, our co-chairs, and to so many mayors, distinguished guests from across Canada, the globe, and of course, Minister Morneau. It's a true honor to be speaking to you today. I'd like to spend my remarks sharing what we at Accenture believe to be the key actions and priorities that cities must be thinking about and acting on now. Largely technological shifts that will help all of you navigate the recovery period and ensure sustainable economic future. Across 13 industry groups here in Canada, including, of course, public service and health. We've been working with various federal, provincial, and municipal departments and agencies around the crisis. For example, highlight that we helped the Canadian government and the ESDC department launch the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit to provide financial aid to Canadians impacted by COVID. In just 4 days, we were able to set up a call center for a team of Canada-based agents. Throughout April, these agents had more than 40,000 calls a day as millions of Canadians applied for financial relief. So in short, we believe public sector organizations, including cities and infrastructure, have the opportunity to really embrace innovation and digital transformation. So as we think about the challenges facing the cities, including the loss of major revenue sources, as all of you have so aptly pointed out, and of course, mounting pressures on things like shelters and food banks and shortage of affordable housing, we think the real opportunities around data can come from data in terms of the opportunity for shooting high around that. And of course, contract tracing as one good example of that will be a key element as we all return to work and school and play in the coming months. I think pre-COVID, we saw rising citizen expectations. Our budgets were continuing to be under pressure at all levels, and of course at municipal levels. And then of course the onset of sustainability imperative defining city challenges for the future that Habitat have so rightly pointed out today. So as we think about the impacts of COVID, and some of these will be permanent, it's even more critical. They data, they embrace digital, and they embrace the ecosystem collaboration that's available to them. And our global digital transformation report, in fact, identified a strong ROI between the level of digitization and the level of economic recovery. An increase in digitization increases GDP, international trade, and of course, employment. Cities that thrive will be those that use data to inform decisions around things like public health, safety, housing, mobility, and those that successfully digitize operations and support remote work. Pivoting to digital will enable cities to better manage infrastructure and imagine our futures. From mobility solutions to 5G, and data are driving better decision-making, maximizing use of limited resources while achieving better outcome for citizens. And what was taking 3 years to accomplish has been happening in months and weeks in the past 3 months. So speed is the new currency. I think the notion of sprints versus long serial plans for implementation, and of course the smart use of data is crucial. So this is the time for industries and all levels of government to come together, address the crisis, and support economic recovery. So thank you, and merci beaucoup.
Krishnan, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Russell, for your remarks. As we say, speed is a new currency. And we're also happy that Accenture will be working closely with the Urban Economy Forum, UN Habitat, in furthering using data and artificial intelligence and analysis in furthering sustainable urban development in the post-COVID era as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Mr. who is the Executive Director of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Mr. Osborough.
Thank you very much for the invitation and good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. AMO's member municipal councils govern and provide services for about 1 in 3 Canadians. And municipalities of Ontario have been on the front line of the COVID-19 emergency. Since it began. And Ontario municipalities are on frontline services in a number of ways, not just what one expects typically, such as police and fire, but in Ontario, it also includes public health, childcare, housing and homelessness, paramedic services, and a role in long-term care. All of those services have been immediately and dramatically affected by COVID-19. All have faced extraordinary new costs and will face added structural costs in the future, at least until an effective vaccine or treatment is available. The same is true for public transit, which faces much higher operational costs and revenue that will carry on for months, if not years. Ontario responded almost immediately with its first step, which was $148 million in social services relief funding to help offset increased municipal human services costs. That block funding has literally saved lives, but has now been exhausted. As you heard earlier this week, the Government of Canada announced its first step in assisting municipalities by advancing the 2020 gas tax funding for infrastructure, a very welcome development. The federal gas tax program is an example of direct federal financial support for municipalities in Ontario, mediated through a trilateral agreement between Canada, Ontario, and municipal governments represented by AMO and the City of Toronto. It stands as an ideal model for much needed emergency operational funding for municipalities and is the model set out in the FCM proposal. Without immediate financial assistance, the alternatives of property tax increases, service cuts, or deferred capital investment will undermine economic recovery. Ontario's $50 billion municipal sector is eager to play its essential role in the restart and recovery. And in addition to emergency financial assistance for operations, municipalities are the ideal destination for federal and provincial capital investments, including for housing, to help rebuild the economy, to put people back to work, to serve the most vulnerable in our society, and to ensure much needed infrastructure is in place to productive economies into the future. In Canada, trust in government is at an all-time high right now. And people trust that all orders of government will work together toward a common purpose of sustainable, healthy, and safe communities. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this conversation.
Thank you very much indeed. So we hope to hear more from you during your discussions. And next we have let me see, there are a few people are saying that they have to leave a bit early. So I don't know, I may have to take the liberty of maybe requesting, is it Martin Medeiros from the City Council of City of Brompton, which is supposed to be arts and inspiration. Hero Martin Medeiros.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of Brampton's Mayor Patrick Brown as we collectively look for ways to take action to increase the resilience of communities and learn from each other. Certainly, the COVID-19 pandemic provides a once-in-a-lifetime responsibility to accelerate the change we require in Canadian cities. Brampton is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada, youngest, most diverse population with the highest transit ridership and largest household size within the greater Golden Horseshoe. Brampton is also disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. The City of Brampton, through the adoption of Brampton 2040 vision, has committed to making a shift from auto dependency to a new growth model of sustainability and social resiliency. The city is focused on delivering walkable, healthy, and resilient neighborhoods to transform transportation corridors into sustainable transit-oriented communities, public investment that optimize public transit investments. I would just like to focus on one initiative underway in our community. Brampton is developing shovel-ready pilots of urban community hubs with the collaboration of our library board, Region of Peel, public health, social services, housing, and our regional school boards, nonprofits, industry. These urban community hubs will serve as a community cornerstone, providing integrated centers for everyone to get access to their libraries, elementary schools, daycares, housing, arts, technology, incubation hubs, community kitchens, and urban agriculture, all in the shared form. They will also serve as a network of response facilities to enable efficient services to our residents during the time of crisis. There's a need to prioritize funding of social infrastructure and ensure early coordinated delivery facilities in high growth areas, alongside other infrastructure projects and urban community hubs are on the way is one way. Just want to thank the organizers, and I'm encouraged for what has been shared, and I look forward to hearing more in the future from some of the presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for the variety of activities already undertaking and not letting the city fall back in recovery efforts. Thank you very much. May I then request Matti Sematiki, who is the Interim Director of School of Cities at the University of Toronto.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. I want to base my comment on 2 key ideas. One is the notion of taking knowledge and turning it into action, and this is the art of the possible. We have known for decades that our cities are deeply unequal. Work by David Holchansky at the University of Toronto has shown that our cities have splintered into places of great affluence and sector poverty and exclusion. This exclusion that we're seeing in our cities is widening. It widens based on infrastructure provision, and it's widening geographically. And I think we have to be very aware that it's not just that inequality is happening, but that parts of our city are further and further behind. Now, the COVID pandemic has accelerated and accentuated those divergences, and parts of our cities, in particular in the inner suburbs, places where there are many low-income people, many racialized Canadians, they are experiencing the pandemic the most acutely in terms of rates and in terms of the impacts on their quality of life and their economic lives. So I think we have to be very clear about the types of evidence and information that we're collecting and using that to inform action. Much of this is not new. We know a lot about these phenomena already, and we can be driving towards actions to alleviate these challenges. This brings me to my comment about the art of the possible. The pandemic has forced us to think differently about how we're going to resolve the challenges that our Canadian cities face. People on this call have spoken about the challenges and the gaps in terms of operations funding and causing a fiscal crisis. But we have also heard about ways that people are rethinking the provision of services. The art of the possible in this moment has enabled people to think bigger and at a scale of resolving these challenges in ways that we have often not been. Mayor Nenshi spoke about eliminating homelessness, not reducing homelessness, eliminating homelessness. And here in Toronto, we have moved faster on implementing bicycle lanes, historically being possible, and similar patterns have taken place across the country. There is a moment where people can think differently, use knowledge that we already have and that we're collecting about the impacts of the pandemic to turn this into a way of designing our cities, implementing our cities, working collaboratively across levels of government and with communities to drive changes that will benefit cities in the current moment as we recover immediately from the pandemic and go forward to address other issues like vast inequality and climate change. Thank you very much for to speak today, and I look forward to working with everyone as we address these challenges together. Thank you.
Voice, Krishnan. Mute on.
So I just wanted to thank Matti for saying that knowledge is power, and we need to make use of it when we can and when we should, and the time is now. Then may I request Eleanor Mohammed, President of the Canadian Institute of Planners, to give her remarks. As I said to all the speakers, kindly confine to the time that we have, as both time is of the essence, and it is as of now. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm here today on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Planners, but I also wear 2 other hats, the Habitat Professionals Forum, and also Deputy Chief Officer for the City of Beaumont. I'm pleased to be speaking with you today from the traditional territory of Treaty 6 and acknowledge all those who share a deep connection with this land. The Canadian histories, languages, and cultures of all of Canada's First Peoples, whether they be Métis, Inuit descent, and appreciates that their presence continues to enrich vibrant communities. We are all treaty people. And it's of social reflection that I frame my comments on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Planners members across this nation. I'm not here today to advocate for how cities should physically look post-COVID. So efforts are made to ask the right questions, so we don't fall into the trap of widening inequalities that already exist and are being expressed at this very moment throughout Canada and the world. We should be applying a wide lens to what we mean by economic recovery. For instance, externality be thought of as external anymore. And who should be involved in these discussions that currently are not? Addressing climate change must now more than ever, we should be steadfast in upholding the principles of the United Nations Sustainable Goals and the new urban agenda. I invite my political colleagues around the table to consider the powers that your respective municipalities already have. Planning is not just a regulatory tool, but can be a visionary, innovation, community building, economic development, technology, and smart city building exercise. Post-COVID, I think we could actually see increased foot traffic in retail areas and other economic gains if the improvements to pedestrian access and cycling remain in place. We have yet to see what will happen to downtown office spaces with the changes in workplace needs, but there may be more opportunity to adapt new vacancies to residential uses, potentially reducing the challenges that many of our cities face. COVID-19 has been a disruptor to cities across the world. From more space afforded to pedestrians and bicycles, to improvement of air quality, to social inclusion and changing work patterns, we're learning more about how we actually want to live in the urban context, rather than accepting the status quo. This is what many planners and urbanists have been calling for over the years, as expressed in healthy communities and climate change policies. This economic reset is pretty difficult and challenging, yet I also see it as a positive opportunity where people of all walks of life, the environment, societal resilience, and health can finally be prioritized.
Sorry, Christian, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm muting all the time. I don't know why. I'm just saying that the listeners also would like to maybe look into UN Habitat Professionals Forum that produce a statement regarding COVID-19 and what plans needs to be taken. Thank you once again. Douglas Reagan from UN Habitat. He is no stranger, originally from Vancouver, and he has been leading environmental organizations in Canada, and he has been leading the youth program in UN Habitat. Now he is a program management officer for human rights and social inclusion of UN Habitat. Among young people in informal settlements, both in Nairobi and rest of the world. Here you are, Doug Reagan.
Thank you very much, Christian. I'm really honored to be here. Thanks so much to Urban Economy Forum, Minister Morneau. I think this is a really outstanding opportunity to discuss these issues. Try to make it quick. I know there's not a lot of time, and we've been on this. I've been on the call for a while. There's just three the new cities need to be socially equitable, environmentally sustainable, and we should use the SDGs as a framework. I think what we've seen with COVID-19 has done one thing. It has ripped the mask off the inequalities of the world. What we once thought were issues and in a day-to-day fashion, we now see are huge. And when an issue such as this, or when a pandemic such as this hits, it really, the devastating effects that can happen. I mean, we see that COVID-19 has hit the poorest of most marginalized women, seniors, the disabled. They have higher infection rates, they have higher death rates, and a lot of it is fairly obvious. They don't have access to healthcare, their jobs are unstable, and they don't have a system behind them. Address this inequality in the system. We no longer can just ignore this. People in informal settlements and slums. You see behind me, this mural is done by one of the young youth groups we work with. And I can tell you that they're incredibly passionate communities, but again, they're doing it with very little resources, and they need to be helped and focused on. And that's a really critical part about cities, is that cities don't seem to be part of the development paradigm oftentimes. Oftentimes when we think of development as serving refugees and refugee camps and such, which are really important to realize that there's 1 billion people living in informal settlements. In Nairobi alone, 60% of the population is in informal settlements on 8% of land base. This is not sustainable, and it's not socially sustainable. It's not also environmentally sustainable. Again, if you have people that are crammed into these places, what they don't have access to is basic services. They don't have access to healthcare. We need to assure all. We can't forget any certain group, and we see what happens. We think for UN Habitat, we believe, and we've been told that in Africa, the COVID-19 pandemic will hit sometime in July and August. It's just starting to grow here. If it gets embedded in these, it would be quite devastating. So we really need to look at that. The last piece I focus on, my third piece, is SDGs. The SDGs are the roadmap, the framework in which we move forward towards and socially sustainable cities. And SDG 11 is the goal focused on cities and sustainable, and we must look at that and use that. So 3 points: socially equitable, environmentally sustainable, and SDGs. I'd like to point out is really excited to do with work with CMHC, the Urban Economy Forum, the Daniels Corporation on the World Urban Pavilion in Regent Park. The reason we're doing this is because Regent global model. And this is, if we're going to talk about, as Eduardo Moreno talked about collecting data and doing data and publishing and figuring out policy around environmentally sustainable cities, the best place to do it is a place that actually is a living area that happens and working directly with the community.
Please.
So again, my ask, include young people, include the LGBT community, and in revealing our society. Thank you.
Much. Thank you. As again, to all speakers, we have many more speakers to go. Kindly try to sort of compress your remarks as much as you can. Thank you once again, Doug, for bringing back the World Urban Pavilion in Toronto, how it will be a showcase for the rest. Thank you very much indeed. And now we have Diego Kramer, who is the head of public affairs of the David Suzuki Foundation. Suzuki Foundation is very well known, renowned both in Canada and in the cause of environment and sustainable development. So since I think Dr. could not be here for the meeting, we have the pleasure of having Diego Kramer. Here you are.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Minister Morneau and to the organizers. I think this is important, even essentials in the times that we're living. I'm gonna talk briefly about building back more resilient human cities. I think that's what everyone has been talking about. What we see now is ways and trams almost empty, rolling slowly through nearly empty downtowns, bringing to shops where they will have to wait on light on the sidewalk. Behind the mask, there is a sense of risk and uncertainty that can be read in their eyes. This image is a snapshot of any big and mid-team. The economic distress brought by the pandemic has disrupted our cities as no other event has done before. It hasn't distracted infrastructure, but rather emptied public spaces and brought human interactions in the physical space to a minimum. Yet in all this sadness and despair, wanting to recognize a unique opportunity to build back better, just as our societies may never be the same after this crisis, our cities will also change forever. And the way that change happens hatches an opportunity for improvement, both economic and human. In particular, structuring interventions on the way community develop is essential for achieving the energy transition, economic prosperity, meeting the aspirations of families by diversifying housing and transportation options, improving the health of citizens, protecting agricultural land and the natural environments around cities, and optimizing infrastructure. This week, a coalition of mayors from big cities and small municipalities in the province of Quebec underlined the importance of reactivating our cities' economies in a way while improving social and environmental performance indicators. And they have accurately pointed out that it's at the municipal and local level that most of the stimulus measures will be deployed for the reopening of businesses and services, of large park consumption of public transportation while maintaining some physical distancing measures. Greenhouse gas emissions, bringing nature closer to us and strengthening our social fabric, thematically included in our analysis grid for future investments at the city level, will apply to support measures for our downtown cores, our commercial streets, the development of public and active transportation, the promotion of local purchasing, the renovation of buildings, and the incorporation of nature-based solutions into existing infrastructure. the beautification of public spaces and the construction and renovation of affordable housing, something that many of you talk about. I will end up by saying that we must invest in of clean, user-friendly and inclusive spaces that improve our indicators of health, safety, and resilience to climate change. The lines that define public space and enable transport must be redrawn from park limits to curbs to allow for new and safer human interactions. And I will end by saying that as we talk, millions of Canadians are wearing masks in the public spaces to protect themselves and others from the COVID. One day the pandemic will be behind us, we will leave our masks at home. We must then be able to circulate in spaces where nature is part of our daily experience and where humans and not cars are the golden ratio upon which landscapes are built. We need cities with the cleanest air if we are to guarantee that we won't have to wear masks again for any reason. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have any time to hide behind masks and we need clean air. Thank you very much indeed. And now we have urban planner Jennifer Kismet, who is the CEO and founder of Kismet Group. Her motto is, as I understand, inspiration, influence, and impact. Here you are, Jennifer Kismet.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see you today, and thank you to the Urban Economy Forum for this opportunity to address the group. I'll just like to take a couple of minutes to introduce the 2020 Declaration for Resilience in Canadian Cities, which is to create a coast-to-coast interdisciplinary baseline for response to COVID-19 in Canadian cities. This declaration was launched, it is a grassroots movement. It has been signed by former premiers and mayors, as well as academics, real estate developers, environmental leaders, authors, filmmakers, and musicians, as well as not-for-profit leaders, former city planners, as well as many people in the planning and design industry. With this declaration was really to identify the immediate quick actions that we can implement that we already know about. We don't need to do new research. We actually know that these are good initiatives for cities that will begin to address the environmental and systemic issues around things like housing affordability, clean air, things. So there's three key areas. One is under the responsible use of land. And if you go to 2020declaration.ca, you'll see that the 6 policies under the responsible use of land beginning to create and transform our land policies to ensure that we are providing access to affordable housing in ways that are sustainable and promote communities that are walkable and future oriented. It was a roundtable that the vast majority of the Canadian population lives in city reality. There's excellent research that we know from the university, from Queen's University, that shows that 75% of new development in Canada over the past 10 years has been in auto-oriented, completely fiscally unsustainable, but also unsustainable from a health and an environmental perspective. So these are actions that can be embraced, that can be transformative. They're under the call of responsible use of land, the acceleration of decarbonizing our transportation systems by embracing infill and walkable communities, and then also embracing sustainability in our environment in cities and also our built environment. And one of the underlying principles, a key thing we've learned through COVID-19 is that density isn't a problem, but we know that poverty and inequality is a problem, and design can either facilitate and accentuate those inequalities or can mitigate them into a fundamentally healthy and inclusive and thriving future. I'd also just like to mention in closing that under the banner where we talk about new ways to inject affordable housing into the landscape of our cities, we have an initiative underway called the Housing Innovations Institute, which we're hoping to launch very soon, which is all about taking those 6 actions in the declaration and initiating a movement for transformation in Canadian municipalities to embrace the required and that we need to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your kind remarks and the resolution that you recently mentioned about the cities and towns and planning. So we hope to be continuing this and your organization, your foundation. As I just want to remind you that 10 minutes left according to the timetable, and many of us or many of the partners want to sort of leave soon, etc. So while I kindly request you to sort of compress your statement, in case we are unable to accommodate all of you, we ensure that your statements will be part of the report that will be presenting to the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister. So let's see how it goes on for the next few minutes. Thank you once again for your patience and for your participation as we go on. We have then Jenny Moore, who is the Director of Institute of Sustainability, British Columbia Institute of Technology, which is a pioneering institute in innovation, technologies of sustainability, both in ideas and action. Here you are, Jenny Moore.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief. Great comments from our ministers, CMHC, UN Habitat, the Urban Economy Forum. Love Jennifer's comments. So very quickly, it's clear we need to lead with equity. People mobility is playing a part. The government's COVID-19 response has put people first and it's well received. However, really losing its relevance for the majority of the middle class. And we need economics with well-being and ecological safety. So I think the UN Habitat Prosperity Index start for us to shift to, as well as the SDGs. And we can only afford to invest in win-win solutions. That's clear. So going forward, I think we also want to look at examples where we rate the real costs. So example would be building housing that's both affordable, accessible, but also at the highest energy standards, zero, but it yields longer substantial returns over the long term. And cities need to get to an 80% reduction in energy materials within the next 10 years. So Canada is doing a good job tying its stimulus packages to climate response and reporting for that same kind of commitment for urban infrastructure investment as well. Can't sustain the sprawling automobile-oriented development. We've heard that already. So people need to make the shift, and we're making the shift through COVID to a new normal, rethinking what business space and street space can be used for highest and best use to maintain livability and give local entrepreneurs an opportunity. And is this: resilient strategies with staying power are local economic developments that keep money circulating within their communities. This contributes to an urban multiplier effect and positively reinforces local labor. So now is the time for us to invest in micro entrepreneurship. We can respond to local needs that build social and economic capital and pivot towards a new reality that embraces an economics of well-being within ecological limits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As it has been always mentioned since the World Conference of Sustainable Development in Rio 1992, think globally and act locally. Unless we act locally, I don't think we can impact globally as well. Thank you very much again, Jenny Moore. Then we have Maya Tate, who is the president of British Columbia Municipalities. Here you are, please.
Good morning, and thank you very much for this opportunity. As president of the Union of BC Municipalities, I have the pleasure and honor of representing all 189 local governments in BC. I'm also the mayor of the district of Souk. Rural, urban, everyone in between have had and felt the effect of this pandemic on local government operations. You've heard from others about the impact and the loss of variable revenue, our inability to run deficits, and that many of our members have cut taxes, laid off staff, implemented hiring freezes, and so forth, all of which has contributed to job loss in communities. We have worked closely with the province to develop a framework, and we see this all as a very good, modest first step. And to that effect, we have been supportive of, as our peers at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and their $10 million in emergency operating funding. We recognize that the losses local governments are incurring are permanent, and that direct emergency operating fund is needed to safeguard the essential services that our communities rely and depend on. We've also called for measures that would address local government funding shortfalls to mitigate the risk of taxes and facilitate a revival of local economy. In line with our federal call for transit support, we have also sought provincialist transit-dependent communities. Going forward, our members have also been seeking an stimulus framework that maximizes flexibility on project category procurement and timelines. Local governments want to see a straightforward, flexible framework that provides one funding for any recovery program, one that is administratively easy to implement and focuses on shovel-worthy projects. Direct allocations of federal funding and support are critical. It must be free of jurisdictional wrangling. We see real benefits in new funding. It has historically generated significant economic returns through increased employment and the flow through of tax dollars to local businesses and the creation of much needed community assets. I've summarized this briefly, but I wish to thank you for the opportunity. We look forward to continuing our work together to support a full economic recovery at the local, provincial level. We are all in this together. Thank you so much.
Kind words, Maya Tate, for saying that we are all in this together and we can't have any more time wasting, the sense that we have to start acting now in recovery and reconstruction in a sustainable way. Thank you very much again. And then we have Mayor Reggie, who is the mayor of Quebec City, which I think also has been experiencing the pandemic, in a much different way than the rest of the country. Maybe we would hear from His Lordship Le Bon. Hello? Can you hear me? What happened?
I believe he's not present.
I can't hear. He's not there. Okay. So then may I then take the liberty of requesting Her Lordship Lisa Helps, who is the Mayor of City of Victoria in British Columbia, which I see playing a key role in sustainability from the time that that we have known that city to be the capital of British Columbia. Thank you very much. Lisa Helps.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I begin by acknowledging that I'm here on the Lekwungen territories, the First Nations territories that the city's home is built on. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the comments that have been made, but I am going to echo Adam Vaughn's call from earlier this morning about a new relationship between the federal, provincial, municipal, and First Nations governments coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the things that has been highlighted for me, and it's been highlighted this morning, is that Canada needs a new governance and finance arrangement that puts cities at the center, establishing on-the-ground programs and services that we can then be held accountable for delivering. Again, other people have made this point. The current structure of Canadian federalism puts urban residents and urban economies at risk. These are on us right now, on cities to deliver everything: housing, childcare, transit, anti-racism program action. Yet cities have little to no direct or predictable revenue to deliver these quality of necessities. So I think coming out of the pandemic right now is the perfect moment to make fundamental shifts in federal, provincial, and municipal relationships, and also to shift in how all of these orders of government work with First Nations. And I'm so glad that Minister Morneau is here because I think there's a real opportunity for the federal government to be a catalyst and a broker. We don't need the federal government to do everything, but I have an opportunity right now for the federal government to work together with the provinces to establish clear for municipal service delivery and create new direct sources of revenue that flow from both provincial and federal governments to municipalities. Talking about emergency funding, other people have made that case. What I'm talking about is reshaping the way the fiscal order of our country is set up. As we all know, the property tax system that is governing the source of revenue for municipalities was set up in 1867, totally inadequate to meet the challenges and opportunities of the cities in the 21st century. A few ideas about what a new fiscal framework could include. We've heard a lot about quality of life, the SDGs, well-being. Prime Minister Trudeau has asked Minister Fortier to develop a framework for measuring well-being. I think this is really exciting. So invest directly in city life and then measure our progress and deliverables against the framework that's being created. Number two, with respect to climate change, invest directly in cities based on emissions reduction plans and implementation of these plans, because the only way the federal government will meet its goal of low carbon prosperity is to treat cities as delivery partners in innovation, reducing emissions, and creating jobs. Third idea in terms of what a new fiscal framework could look like is with respect to fiscal power and revenue raising. I think, again, there's a real opportunity to align the powers and revenue raising opportunities for fiscal arrangements to ones that are permitting cities around the world to flourish. And here, there are probably a lot more. One is congestion pricing, another might be a municipal sales tax, and then other progressive taxation and revenue raising opportunities. As we've all said this morning, city leaders have been on the front lines of responding to COVID-19. And I just want to close by saying that respecting Canada's constitutional framework doesn't mean that we can't innovate, or we put at risk the opportunity of creating the inclusive, equitable urban economy this morning. And I think if we don't innovate within the Constitution right now as an opportunity for COVID, we really do lose the chance to build back better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much again. As you know, the solutions of yesterday is not good for today and tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed. I leave the word to the Chair of Urban Economy Forum, Reza Pourwaziri. Reza, please.
Yeah, it's a great and it's long. I'm sure you're tired, but I believe we really need your comments, your valuable comment to include in the report for Finance Minister, and to create a kind of the kind of comprehensive plan that please stay with us and continue your participation. It would be great for our program. Thank you so much. Alex, thank you.
Hello, everybody. Yes, thank you so much for those of you who continue to stick on with us on this call. It's been a great conversation. We are nearly at the end, and we still have a lot of great speakers still to continue. Next on our agenda, we have Mr. Ganchi, who is the president of the Ganchi Foundation.
Yes, hello, everybody, and thank you for having me here today. As you all know, the world has always been changing, and now we are in the middle of a new reality. COVID is a serious challenge, but it is also a signal that we need to be more prepared and aim to change. I think housing is one of the most important sectors that requires to be accommodating to people during such challenging times. People shouldn't worry about losing the roof over their head, and I think the government of Canada in all the areas did very well and became a shining star in the world. However, there is more to be done, and as we go forward, we will be facing more challenges that we should be prepared for. There were also some significant prior changing accelerated, especially with the rapid advancement of technology and the ever-changing environment it is causing. Online shopping, work from home trends, shared economies, congested roads, damaging air pollution, rising obesity statistics, rising mental health issues, and domestic violence. All of these are some examples of the changes and the challenges societies are facing, and COVID-19 has had significant impact on them. On some very positive impacts, such as traffic, even though on short term, and on some very negative effect, such as various physical and mental health issues. I think housing can significantly affect and determine the outcome. It can make the betterment of our cities and our societies. And I think the decision makers and the stakeholders should recognize the rapid changes and plan. I think we should aim to be always a step ahead. For example, more affordable housing should be encouraged, more housing that allows for a better suited environment, more housing. I think more affordable housing and more housing that allows for better suited environments for work from home should be encouraged. Designs that encourage ride sharing, designs that should encourage studies to see how to implement housing designs that can reduce health issues and domestic violence. One area that specifically needs attention is the zoning regulations, which tend to be less flexible. I think cities should be dynamic and adapt to changes easily to implement the rapidly changing needs of the society. And in this regard, the city leaders play a paramount role. Also, the important contribution that can be made by the private sector should be highlighted, and they should be more encouraged to be involved. Again, I would like to thank all the various levels of the Government of Canada for the outstanding work that they have, and I encourage more preparedness and more involvement in the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Masood. Thank you for contributing. Next up on the agenda is Mr. Barry Morishita. Mr. Barry Morishita is the president of the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association.
Hello, thank you very much. I'll be brief. A lot of what's been said, what to say has already been said. I want to thank you very much for, as has been said before, COVID-19 in particular has accelerated and the problems that are inherent with the system of financing Canada's urban cities. And in Alberta, the AUMA represents 85% of the people that live in Alberta. And as only about 50% of our revenue comes from property taxes, which is at its best a regressive form of taxation and doesn't really reflect the realities of a new economy and the elastic activity, we do have to redefine what we're doing. Potential severe impacts, and as we call for short-term funding changes in the very same way that our long-term funding should be addressed. It should be direct, it should be unconditional, and it should be allowed that individual communities have the ability to, in fact, determine their own priorities to build resilient, to build communities that make a difference. As Adam Vaughan put it, municipalities, particularly cities and urban centers, are going to be at the forefront of the recovery from COVID, and certainly the forefront of the recovery economically and growth going forward. And as COVID has really showed the weaknesses in the system for coordinated efforts from the provincial and federal government to deal with that short-term funding, to look at how we can provide long-term sustainable funding to municipalities as we go forward in order to provide that growth. I think it's really important that these significant investments be made now. A number of programs that have been instituted in the last several years have been adequate in their delivery, and I'm referring particularly to funding with the federal government that has taken far too long in this province to deliver, and have potential to provide a lot of economic recovery and build the infrastructure needed to 21st century cities function properly. So again, I think removing these barriers as we go forward is the key thing. We should learn from this pandemic. We should learn that cities, urban centers can provide the leadership and growth to go forward. And so my last ask quickly is that the federal government at this moment in time needs to take the leadership role. There is a crisis right now. They need to be the leaders in the country, bring the parties together, get the programs in place, and propose changes that will serve municipalities, not just in the next few months, for the next several years. So thank you, and speakers today.
Thank you, Barry. It's great to join us from the Municipal Association in Alberta. Next up on our agenda, Mr. Benjamin Tall. Mr. Benjamin is the Deputy Chief Economist of CIBC.
Yes, thank you very much. I will be relatively brief. Every crisis is a trend accelerator, and this crisis is no different. We are going to see deglobalization. We are going to see e-commerce taking over. We are going to see remote working taking over. And all those trends, of course, will impact cities in a very significant way. I would like to focus on two trends that I think that are very, very important.
日日鬧事，很勁破壞香港法例，很勁破壞很勁係我哋仇人，很勁日日鬧事，破壞香港法例，很勁破壞香港法例，香港法例，香港法例。